Hey guys, welcome back to the New Churches podcast. I'm Tony Merida, and I'm joined today with my friends Matt Smethurst and Daniel Santander.
You got it.
I got both of those names.
There we go.
On this, in this season, we're looking at some how questions for church planters, as we fielded questions, and we're working through all sorts of how-tos. And this one is obviously important as we think about what is it? How do we make disciples? We know that we should make disciples. We know that Jesus has given us the Great Commission to make disciples. And the question we're trying to answer is more of a how do we do this in our day? How did we do this in the 21st century in North America?
Yep.
How do we disciple individual Christians? How do we disciple new Christians? How do we lead? How do we disciple a church? Congregationally, corporately. So let's think about these things together, all right? So Matt, I'll start with you. In a plant, Lord willing, new Christians, we see people come to faith, and we have a lot of new Christians now to disciple and mature in the faith. We're thinking through here topics, plans, suggestions, ideas you have for how to disciple new converts.
Well, I think this may seem counterintuitive to some, but I think that establishing a formal membership process is actually a lot of what feeds this idea that people are taking responsibility for one another's spiritual welfare. So we live in an age in which Christians are all about community, they're all about discipleship, but talking about something like church membership may seem a little more stuffy or irrelevant, but actually having that formal commitment is going to bind together a group of believers such that they're saying, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, and they are mine. Church membership is where it's none of your business goes to die. And that's, I think, the starting line for thinking about intentionally doing spiritual good to others as we're helping one another pursue Christ.
That's excellent. I want to come back to this question of church membership in just a moment. Daniel, anything you would add about discipling new converts in your context?
Yes, I think that what I'd like to sort of point is that, at least it was my experience that growing up, when I got this when I was discipled, it was more about sharing instruction. So it was good. It was good because we went through a number of books, and it just gave the impression that once you're done with all the 4 books, you were discipled. And what I've learned through the years is that it's mostly about imparting the life of Jesus in you, in other people's lives. So when we talk about how, I think it's critical to bring up the element that is not just that we are passing on information, but actually we're imparting life, Jesus' life through others. And I think that's what makes it makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's great. I think about in Acts 9, it says that Barnabas took Paul. Barnabas did more than just give a book to Paul or here's some sermons to listen to. But like when people were concerned about being in the presence of Paul, Barnabas took him and walked with him. And I think that that component of not just sharing our doctrine, which we need to do,
correct,
but sharing what it looks like to, if you're married, love your wife, what it looks like to be a good steward of your finances. I've learned so much through the years being mentored and discipled by guys because they took me with them. I think hospitality in some measure plays into this. Just constantly having people in your life.
Just the fact that they are sharing life with you. Like I remembered this guy, he took the time to, when we talk about being a good steward, we're the stewards, and he took the time of sharing how he does budgeting.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I mean, this is not even in the Bible specifically, but still he showed me how to. Yeah. And that was so practical and critical.
Yeah, I became a Christian in college, and my teammates on the baseball team who were believers really were my early disciplers. And I still remember one of my friends, he was our second baseman, he had a Post-it note on his wall that said, this week's tithe, like $30 or something like that. Wow. And I've never forgotten that because we didn't have any money. We were college students playing sports, and he was already thinking about next week's offering. And I bothered him so much because I had so many questions. I remember I would knock on his apartment, and a couple of times he'd be like, no. Like he just didn't have the energy. Or he had to study. But like having people in your life that you can ask all your questions to. A lot of that, I think, in discipling new converts is them just having someone accessible, someone that they can talk to about all things, because literally everything has changed in their life, right?
Well, and I'm glad you brought up that principle about how it's not just information transfer. It's about pursuing the life of Jesus and seeing that reproduced in one another. I'm reminded of the passage in Mark 3 where Jesus is calling the 12 apostles on the mountain. And it says, Mark 3:13, Jesus went up on the mountain and summoned those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, to be with him, to send them out to preach. And we can look at that passage and think, okay, well, this is about being called in and sent out. And it's true, right? We're called in order to be sent out. But we miss that phrase. He called them first and foremost, not to send them out, but that they might be with him. Yeah. That's what discipleship is at its best, is bringing others along as you seek to have intimate communion with the Lord Jesus.
That's great.
I love it.
That's great. I want to return to your topic of church membership that you had mentioned, and I'm glad you tie that to basic discipleship, right? That this is in many ways just intensified, if you will, a little bit more structured form of discipleship. That I'm sure church planters that are watching have questions about how do you do church membership in a church plant? When do you do it? What are the best practices? I would love to just hear your thoughts on all things church membership, and I may ask some follow-up questions. So why don't you kick us off?
Well, we make membership in many ways the doorway into involvement. And I know that's counterintuitive and goes against a lot of the literature out there regarding church planting. And I'm not saying there aren't other faithful ways to think about church planting, but I don't think you can faithfully pastor a church if you're not leading people to think about their conscious commitment to one another and responsibility for one another. Yeah. And therefore, we want to cultivate in our church a culture of spiritual intentionality, relational intentionality, and to create space for people to do that. Yeah. So we don't want to over-program church life. Yeah. Such that the members aren't actually having the margin to take responsibility for one another and, again, to bring others along. Church plants are going to attract all kinds of people, and not always the healthiest types. Church plants are going to attract malcontents. They're going to attract consumers. And so I think it's really important, just for the sake of truth in advertising, as an act of love to those who are considering your church plant, to be very clear about what they're signing up for. And what are they signing up for? To step into the office of church membership and to take ownership of the spiritual well-being of others in the church.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
I love what you just said, because back in Argentina, that's where we had the opportunity to plant our first church. And I was young, didn't know much except what I was taught in those few years of college, and I was dropping a city and pretty much invited to go door by door, knock on doors, share the gospel, whoever come to the Lord Jesus, then disciple them. And we started this little church, but we didn't even think about membership back then. It was they were welcome. We sort of knew who was there, but later on, I was thinking, what a big difference it would have been to know what we know now, which is first it's biblical. But it's so critical, like you just said, for a pastor to be able to shepherd well. He's got to know who is in their congregation. But then you also add the element of not only it's biblical, but also it provides accountability. Not just accountability, but it's a declaration of faith. Be able to introduce new members, and clearly they are stating that they have chosen to follow Jesus. So it's been a great experience to learn through, maybe not a good experience early in my ministry, but the difference it makes. So from the beginning, start with a membership. Yeah, absolutely. At our church, our process is pretty simple, pretty standard, I would imagine, for some at least. It begins with a membership class that
We've done it in different ways through the years. We've done it on Saturdays. We've done it in between worship services. We've done it Sunday evenings. But it's a pretty substantial class that, is highlighting our doctrine, our philosophy of ministry, introducing them to the mission of the church, who the elders are, all foundational matters, and then also really trying to capture the culture of the church, try to convey that. Early on, I think our membership class was a little bit too sterile. It was a little bit too, where we just found later we could probably give you stuff to read so that we're not actually working through every doctrinal point,
Yes.
And let's come with discussion. Let's come ready to talk about it rather than let me explain all this stuff that's in front of you, and really try to capture what the mission of what makes IDC unique. After that, we have a step of, they're going to meet with, if they want to keep pressing forward, meet with the pastor. So every member has had a pastoral interview. We're hearing their testimony, making sure they can articulate the gospel, asking what questions they have. Are there any doctrinal questions? We're trying to identify any potential hang-ups they might have, complaints they may try to have later. One of the things we're trying to do, I think, in membership is let people know, hey, here's who we are. Do you really want to be in? Because we don't want you to get in, and then now all of a sudden you're upset. But we told you up front. This is what we're about. And then we have a covenant that they sign, a covenant that we wrote, and then we introduce them to the body and affirm them as members. And you're right. I mean, that accountability of we're here together, we're here for one another, that this is practically how we're going to play out all the one another's of the New Testament is so vitally important. And as a pastor, to know I am actually accountable for a certain group of people that I'm going to give an account for. It's different than my relationship to every Christian in the city of Raleigh.
Correct.
And my relationship to this particular church. Those are really different. So we're always trying to encourage people who continue to attend but don't join. Like, here are the benefits. Here are the reasons why we want you to consider this next step. A lot of people, as you've already indicated, come to church plants with a whole host of experiences.
Yes.
Some of them are gun shy. Some of them are not trusting of church leaders in those kinds of things. So, you're not trying to be heavy-handed with this. You're trying to be careful and wise. But at the same time, express to them this is for your good. Like, the church membership process here is not so that we can exercise authority and domination or whatever, It's not for us to get involved in your bank account.
And control.
This is actually for your good, that you are covenanting with a people. You are identifiable.
Yes.
You people know you. You know them. You know the pastors. They know you. And you will grow through a healthy membership process. Yes. The how you execute it in a church, we can discuss, like, what's the best way to do that. But having it, to me, is a priority. And there's something that's tremendously lost. And I don't even know how you do certain things like church discipline without having a real church membership. Right.
Right. And no one's above it. The pastors are fundamentally members.
Yeah.
Every shepherd is first and foremost a sheep. And so making it clear that I, as one of the elders, am submitting to others in my life, and not just the elders, in a sense, to the whole congregation.
Yeah.
I think that's really vital. And I love how you mentioned, Tony, that this church covenant, because I think that could sound like maybe some archaic tradition. Talk about why you do that and what's the practical role of the covenant in the church life.
Yeah, so what I mean is not what a lot of us grew up seeing on the wall of a Baptist church. That was all the things we couldn't do. We try to intentionally just use the language of the New Testament when we wrote our covenant. So we're not adding extra biblical expectations.
I like that.
So most of it is just phrases out of the New Testament, and it's mainly the one another's of the New Testament. And I think one, for just clarity, so people can see on a sheet of paper, man, I am covenanting to honor my brothers and sisters. I am committing to bear their burdens.
Yes.
I'm committing to pray for them. I'm committing to restore them in a spirit of gentleness. On and on and on. Like, I think it's important for the clarity piece, I think it's also important whenever, you have to have a hard conversation with a member who is walking away from the Lord. There's been a continued season of absenteeism, whatever.
Yes.
Hey, these are things we committed to do together. And we're also committing, hey, come after me if I leave these things, right? And we're going to do that.
Right.
So I think putting some real specificity to membership is important. And if you think about it, this is not, a lot of people, I think it's because of the American individualism and consumerism that we fight against, that people bristle at this idea. But it takes a lot to join a gym or a fraternity,
right.
or it takes more, in many cases, more steps to join certain things. And we're talking about the church here.
Yes.
We need to make sure we're on the same page, we believe the same gospel, we are committing to the same like this should not be that difficult of a hurdle for you to get over. And again, you just keep coming back to this idea, hey, this is for everybody's good. And again, how you do it can look differently. Man, when we had a church plant, we were in a middle school auditorium, and we only had one other classroom that we could rent. And so before the worship service, we had membership class, and then that room turned into childcare. Like it was.
Yeah, you gotta make it work.
You're making it work. But I think the principle of there needs to be an identifiable people that you're pastoring and shepherding, and that those people have a shared sense of what we're doing together.
Also, you made me think when you mentioned discipline. I was wondering if that's also the reason why lately we hear so little about church discipline.
Yeah.
In many instances, churches are not practicing.
Yeah.
And it may be because they don't know who their membership is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because, again, that Latino, Hispanic culture, but back in our countries, there's a sense of respect for the pastor, or because I remember a lot of our people, they come from a Catholic background, so there's a little bit of that respect. So when you discipline them, they don't leave church.
Yeah.
What I noticed here is that they are more sensitive about how they discipline because they quickly leave church.
Yeah.
They are missing the element of covenant, or I'm responsible, I'm accountable to this church.
Yeah.
So I love, because at the end of the day, it affirms we affirm their faith, and that we will be watching for them. But on their end, they are saying, I submit to the care and the authority of this leadership.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things you're trying to teach in church membership class is how church discipline works and what it is and what it is not. And to remind people that we're always doing discipline. Like when we're teaching the Bible, that's a form of discipline. That's a corrective discipline.
Correct.
But church discipline that you're talking about is that restorative act of discipline.
Yes.
That it is an attempt of restoration, not of exclusion, but you can't do that properly if you don't have an understanding of who's in.
That is correct.
And you're choosing to as you join, to put yourself in that spot of please come after me if I walk away from these things.
Well said.
And we have a sister in our church who moved out of the area and ghosted us and refused to join another gospel preaching church. And we didn't just remove her from the rolls because we're not just going to release her into the ether.
Right.
We lovingly, gently pursued her and told her that we were going to bring her name to the church for discipline. It wasn't going to be an immediate process, right? It would lay over for a couple months. Yeah. People would have the chance to reach out to her, think the steps of Matthew 18. The Lord used that like smelling salts to wake her up, bring her back, and now she's one of our most involved, vibrant, happy members. And she stood up at one of our prayer services and gave a brief testimony of how the church discipline process saved her life.
That's amazing.
Now, every story doesn't turn out that way, but Jesus knew what he was doing when he designed all this.
His plan works. Yeah.
And something you just said reminded me of an article by a friend of mine, Jerry, who is a church planter in the Detroit area. He wrote an article called FOBO, Gen Z's FOMO. And he was a college minister for many years. And he said that he noticed a shift in talking to students over the years, the shift from what's often called FOMO, fear of missing out, to FOBO, fear of better options. And I'll just read a paragraph from it. He says, the average person's inner dialogue seems to have shifted from, what if I go and they have fun without me, to what if I commit now and regret it later? FOBO may be the reason why, if you spend time with young people, you get texts like this. I'd love to get lunch at that time as long as I don't have something else going on. Or I'll plan on being there unless something changes. I think this is a great opportunity for us as pastors to teach our people, not just young people, but young people in particular, that there is no way to live a productive, healthy life with all your options open. Part of what it means to enter a godly dating relationship or an accountability group or to submit your life to a church is to have your options close off as you walk by faith and not by sight.
That's good.
And that's actually what God's going to use to propel you forward in the Christian life.
Those are good words.
That's excellent. As planters, shifting from this topic a little bit, begin to, as the church begins to grow, as you get opportunities to do more and more ministry and discipleship, they're going to be thinking about starting small groups, student ministries, perhaps men's, women ministries. How do you start these? Like, what are some questions to ask? What are some good steps of wisdom that you would share with them?
I would say start small and have the patience and, frankly, the courage to move slowly. You don't have to be fully outfitted on day one with all the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
Yes.
People are going to come into your church. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about it as the temptation for all of us to project our wish dream on essentially a blank canvas. Your church should not be a blank canvas for people to just project their wish dreams for what a church ought to be. And so you want to be clear about expectations from the beginning. But you also have to realize people are going to come in wanting you to do all kinds of good things.
Yes.
You know, they might be all about small groups or all about Sunday school or all about women's stuff or all about good things that you can't be firing on all cylinders from day one, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So I would say get the ministry of the word right and the worship of God's people as you're coming together every Sunday. Make sure that's set and that's healthy. And we tell our people, you know, in your first several months as a member, don't try to be some ministry superstar. Commit to one ministry above all, and that's the ministry of attendance.
Yeah.
The ministry of attendance.
good.
Just show up when the church gathers. Put yourself in a position to be known. Be intentional about getting to know others, and watch what God
happens.
might do.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yes. To that, I will add also stay mission focused.
Yeah.
I think when you're starting, like you mentioned, there's that pressure even from your core team about, hey, let's get this going or let's get this ministry started. And suddenly, as a church planter, you feel that pressure that, yeah, we should do it. And now you have multiple ministries, but now they are not aligned. They are not mission focused, and you are doing a lot of things. Your team they are struggling. The team is not big, so there's a lot on their shoulders, and now you are completely outside the mission. So that's something else, Tony, that I will mention. You got to intentionally make sure that your ministries, when you start, like you said, start small, start slow, but make sure that it's mission focused.
Yeah. I have so many stories come to mind when you were talking about Bonhoeffer. By the way, that's an excellent book if you haven't read Life Together. That's early on in that book where he talks about the wish dream, because you're going to have people come into your church plant with wish dreams.
Yes.
And or an established church, if you're an established church pastor, and you know this, like they're coming in with some expectation that you can never meet, and that's just a really good section in that book. But I'm also thinking about the need not only to start slow and to be clear on what we're offering and why we're offering things, but making sure that these ministries are not operating in silo, like just kind of running off by themselves.
Become churches within a church.
Exactly. That is so problematic, having this kind of cavalier ministry over here, and you don't know as a pastor what's going on, and you can really fuel some division and all sorts of issues. So I think it's very important to make sure whatever we're starting, there's clear vision, and that it fits within the macro vision of the church, and that it's pushing the mission and vision forward, and not creating any kind of problem or sideways energy. And I do think there's a temptation as a church planter to start too many things too quickly.
Yes.
And so I would just say, man, do the main things really well. I think what we're talking about here with church membership, the preaching of the word, the one another's of the New Testament, and then slowly we can add some things as things go on. And when we add, we want them to be good, and we want them to again be in alignment with the rest of the church, rather than just starting a whole lot of things.
Yeah, there's an article online by a guy named Jamie Dunlop called "The Regulated Free Market Approach to Mercy Ministry," but it's applicable not just to Mercy Ministries, but to actually all kinds of ministries. I would commend it to listeners. And essentially what he's getting at is that rather than the elders just kind of deciding in a vacuum what the church is going to be about in terms of those ministries, see where the Holy Spirit is already leading your people. And these categories aren't original to me, but bless. There's really three ways you can relate to a good ministry that a member is excited about: bless, catalyze, or own. You bless it is, hey, go get him, brother. Go get him, sister. We'll catalyze. We're going to give it a little more, probably upfront championing. And then own, it's going to be a line item in the budget. And everyone is going to naturally, right? It's no fault of their own. They're going to want their thing to become the church's thing. And you just can't do that. So there are going to be many things that organically you can encourage your people to be involved in, but it's those things that seem to develop traction that you can then say, oh, well, maybe we should get behind this in a bigger way.
That's excellent. Good categories. Guys, it's been really helpful.
Thank you.
Very important topic. How do we make disciples? Thanks, listeners, for checking us out on this edition of New Churches. Please leave a review, subscribe. This will help people be connected to more of our resources. Also, check us out on YouTube. Feel free to leave a review there as well. And we'll join you on the next episode next time.